Good morning. I want to offer my voice of welcome as well. I want to thank the team for leading us into worship this morning. We come to the last part of Titus chapter 1 today. We're already behind schedule, so I don't know how long this series is going to take us because I was planning to be into chapter 2 last week. Anyway, we're looking at this idea of religion today, and sometimes people can look at individuals and see those that have a real strict religion that they adhere to. And they can appear to us as those that have deeper morals, they're more disciplined, even more godly. Some people associate that with strong rules, high standards, clear boundaries, and they look at a person and go, man, they must be serious about God. If they're going to check all these boxes and they're going to follow all these rules and these laws, they must be serious about their relationship with God. But we come to this passage today, and Paul says something that's a little unsettling when we get here. He shows us that it is possible for religion to not only fail to make us better, but it can actually make us worse. You know, you go back 10 years or so, there was the big saying that it's not about religion, it's about a relationship. You remember that? I mean, that was big for a long time. But there's some truth in that. There's a lot of truth in that. And we see here that Paul describes these teachers as deeply religious, morally strict, outwardly impressive. But look at what marks their lives. It's corruption and deception and godlessness. It's a very short passage, but it's very sharp. These people claim to know God, but by their actions, they deny him completely. Their religion has not produced holiness, it's produced hypocrisy. It's not led to good works. It's made them unfit to do anything good. And it raises a sobering question for us. What kind of religion are we practicing? One that genuinely leads to godliness, or one that merely looks holy but leaves our hearts unchanged? Let's go ahead and read our passage this morning, Titus chapter 1, starting in verse 12. Here's what it says. One of their very own prophets said, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. For this reason, rebuke them sharply so that they may be sound in the faith and may not pay attention to Jewish myths and the commands of people who reject the truth. To the pure, everything is pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. In fact, both their mind and conscience are defiled. They claim to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for any good work." See what I mean about being a little sharp? He doesn't hold back here. Paul has asked Titus to straighten out the things that were left unfinished, to appoint these leaders who are going to protect the church from these people that are teaching false doctrine. And these false teachers that he's addressing here, these are not atheists. These are not pagans. These are insiders. They talk about God, they teach about morality, and they impose rules. But their teaching is rooted in human commands, not divine truth. And the result of that is a life that contradicts the gospel. At the heart of this passage is this contrast that Paul's already introduced at the start of the letter. The truth that leads to godliness versus religion that looks wise but produces godlessness. Paul doesn't just expose legalism here. He shows us why it fails, what it produces, and why only the gospel of grace can create people who are truly fit for the purposes of doing good. And so as we work through these verses, we see three ways religion can actually make us worse. As we see, the answer is not looser morals. That's not what we're getting at here. It's not lower standards. What we're needing is deeper grace. We need to embrace the gospel truth. We need hearts that have been transformed from the inside out. And Paul begins by showing what looks like spiritual seriousness is subtle danger. Because legalism, it doesn't deepen godliness. It narrows it. Legalism limits godliness. Paul's not dealing with irreligious people. He's dealing with people who are very religious, teachers who know how to talk about God, who impose moral standards and demand obedience. The issue in Crete, it's not moral looseness. It's not moral looseness disguised as grace. It's moral strictness disconnected from truth. And it immediately challenges our assumptions. Again, we can tend to think those that follow the rules, those that do all the things, they're more serious about their godliness. They're the ones, you've seen your whole life. They're on every committee. They're at every meeting. They pray out loud unhindered. They do all the wonderful things that we all like. Oh, I wish I could do that. I wish that was me. Oh, I wish I could teach. We look at some of those people and we think, man, they got it all. They follow the rules. They have their daily Bible study. They've read the Bible through every year of their life since they've become a Christian. They didn't even skip Leviticus and Numbers. Feel called out yet? No. But we do. We look at them and we think, man, they're serious about their godliness. And Paul says the opposite can be true. The danger Paul exposes is not godliness is being taken too lightly. It's that it's being redefined too narrowly. In verses 12 through 14, Paul shows us what legalism does. It takes the broad, the deep, heart-leveled obedience that God desires, and it shrinks it down to this manageable set of external rules. And instead of asking, do you love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, legalism asks, are you keeping those particular commands? Instead of addressing lying or brutality or selfishness, instead of addressing lack of self-control at the heart level, these false teachers are distracting people, right? They're using these Jewish myths and these human commands. And the result is that people may appear obedient, but they remain unchanged. See, legalism doesn't raise the bar. It lowers it by replacing a life of godliness with selective obedience. Verse 14 is crucial in this. It says, they pay attention to Jewish myths and to the commands of people who reject the truth. This is a turning point here. When God's revealed truth is replaced with human rules, godliness is no longer defined by what God has said, but by what people find impressive or controllable. And once that shift happens, obedience becomes external. Religion becomes performative. Godliness becomes measurable rather than meaningful. And this problem, external religion replacing heart-level obedience, it's not something that's new to us. It's not something that's just been created. God has always rejected worship that looks faithful on the outside, but leaves the heart untouched. It's exactly what God condemns in Isaiah 29. He says, these people approach me with their speeches to honor me with lip service, yet their hearts are far from me, and human rules distract their worship of me. See, Isaiah even shows us what legalism really is, honoring God with words and rules while keeping him at a safe distance from the heart. And when godliness is reduced to human commands, it's not elevated, it's hollowed out. God's complaint is not that his people are irreligious, but that their religion has become hollow. Yeah, their mouths are active, their rituals are intact, the rules are observed, but their hearts, they're completely disengaged. See, legalism allows people to remain at a safe emotional and spiritual distance from God. It replaces love and trust and dependence, and it inserts routines and regulations. And God is acknowledging, he's acknowledged, but he's not cherished. When the heart is distant from God, obedience becomes this mechanical and selective thing. And once obedience is no longer flowing from our love for God, it's got to be managed. And it's got to be managed obedience. It always looks for areas that are visible. Well, those are measurable, they're controllable. I mean, people begin to focus on the parts of God's law they can keep well. And they kind of quietly negate the parts that are hard, right? They require those that require humility and compassion and self-sacrifice. We're kind of like, let's kind of shove those to the side. I cannot drink, and I cannot have premarital sex, and I can refrain from all the things I shouldn't. But compassion and self-sacrifice, let's just kind of shove and it's not accidental. It's inevitable. Legalism needs rules that can be checked off because the heart is no longer the driving force. Again, Jesus exposes this exact thing in Matthew 23. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You pay a tenth of mint, dill, and cumin, and yet you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These things should have been done without neglecting the others." The Pharisees, right? The Pharisees are obsessively obedient in these minor technical matters. Here they are tithing on herbs, something that the law barely addresses. That's what they're concerned with because people can see that. You can check that off if you tithe off your herbs. But what are they neglecting? Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. That's the very heart of God's character. Jesus' point is devastating. They are not failing because they ignore God's law. It's because they've rearranged it. They've said, this is what's important. They shrink godliness down to what's impressive and manageable. And in doing that, they miss what matters most to God. Where Isaiah shows us legalism is worship shaped by human rules with our hearts that are far away from God, Jesus shows us how legalism produces people who look obedient, and yet they're neglecting the very things that God values most. And together, they expose the same danger that Paul's confronting here in Titus. Legalism limits godliness by redefining it, by using human terms rather than God's. And it leads us to this important question. If legalism can produce people who are disciplined, moral, and religious, and yet leave their hearts unchanged, then what power does legalism really have? And that's where Paul goes next. Legalism doesn't only limit godliness, legalism has no power to change the heart. There's no power to change the heart. Paul goes deeper here. He begins to expose this fatal weakness at the center of legalism. Legalism can't do anything to us. It's not going to transform the hearts. Verse 15, it might be one of the most penetrating statements in this letter. It says, to be pure, or to the pure, everything is pure. But to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. In fact, both their mind and conscience are defiled. Here, Paul completely reverses the logic of the false teachers. The false teachers believed purity came from avoiding certain things. Purity came from avoiding certain foods and certain drinks and certain behaviors. And Paul says the opposite is true. Purity is not created by what you avoid externally. It flows from what you are internally. See, the problem is not creation. The problem is corruption. Legalism assumes if you control your behavior, you're going to change your heart. I mean, Paul insists that unless the heart is changed, behavior management is ultimately powerless. You can fence sin in, but you can't drive it out. Jesus speaks to this in Mark. He says, For from within, out of people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a person. I mean, here Jesus dismantles the entire external approach to holiness. He makes it extremely clear that sin is not primarily a problem of what we encounter, but of what we already have within us. It's not something that sneaks into us from the outside, like forbidden food or drink or social temptation that make us corrupt. What's he tell us? Sin flows out from us from the inside. It comes from our hearts. It comes from our desires. It comes from our minds. What we say, what we do, how we act are natural expressions of the condition of our hearts. And this has enormous implications. It means that rules about food and drink or contact, no matter how strict or impressive, they cannot address the real problem. Legalism focuses on the symptoms, the outward behaviors, while ignoring the source of the disease. Rules may temporarily suppress actions, but they can't remove the inner corruption that produces those actions. It's like with liver disease. It doesn't help someone that has liver disease to say, just stop drinking. That it might slow a symptom, but it's not going to address the underlying problem that remains. Legalism is like that. It keeps people busy with avoidance, with restriction and performance, but it does nothing to the heart. The heart remains unchanged, and as soon as the rules are removed, or as soon as someone finds a loophole, all these old patterns begin to resurface. This is why legalism always feels busy, but never transformative. There's movement, there's activity, there's effort, but the life of holiness, it never actually takes root. And people may look disciplined, they may seem serious to the outside world, but inwardly, their desires remain unchecked. Their motives often remain self-serving. Obedience without heart transformation, that's hollow. And Paul presses this point a little further in Colossians. Look what he says there. Although these have a reputation for wisdom, by promoting self-made religion, false humility, and serve severe treatment of the body, they are not of any value in curbing self-indulgence. Yeah, legalism can look impressive. It sounds radical. It feels serious, but Paul says it has no power. Not reduced power, not limited power, not weak power, no power to restrain sinful desire. Rules can modify behavior for a time. When I was a teacher, you know the best way to quiet a classroom of 8th graders? Pull out a bucket of candy. And the first quiet one, you chuck them a piece of candy and everybody else shuts up. You can modify behavior quite easily. You really can, but it doesn't necessarily change their behavior. It doesn't cure it completely. There's no power in that. The only thing that does that, the only thing that can create new desires and new loves and new hearts is Jesus Christ. His gospel's the only thing that does that. It confronts us with this uncomfortable truth. You can obey rules and you can still be corrupt. You can avoid certain sins and you can still love them. You can look pure and still be impure. And so the question isn't what rules am I keeping? The question becomes, what's shaping my heart? If we rely on rules to fight sin, we're going to either become proud, we're going to think we're succeeding, or we're going to become crushed when we fail. But if our hearts are being reshaped by the truth of the gospel, by grace, by forgiveness, by the love of Christ, obedience begins to flow out of transformation, not fear. And it leads us directly to Paul's final warning. If legalism limits godliness, if it has no power to change the heart, then what kind of lives does it actually produce? Legalism produces God-denying lives. It doesn't just fail to produce holiness, it actively leads people away from it. Here these false teachers, they know how to talk about God. They know how to teach about God. They know how to appear religious. But their lives tell a completely different story. They profess what they do not possess. Their religion becomes a mask that hides the corruption of their heart rather than curing it. Paul's language is intentional here. These people, they claim to know who God is, but their actions, they contradict their words. This is the opposite of genuine faith. It's the danger of legalism. People can appear righteous, they can follow the rules, but they can still be spiritually dead. They're not simply failing, they are denying God in their very actions. Go back to James's reminder to us that faith, if it doesn't have works, is what? It's dead by itself. James helps us understand why Paul can say that these works deny God. A faith that never produces obedience is not merely immature, it's dead. James doesn't say faith without works is weak. He says it is dead. Now dead things, they may look intact, but they have no life. They have no power. They have no direction. And this connects with Paul's language quite easily. Legalism produces people who can talk about God but are spiritually lifeless. Legalism replaces this living faith with a verbal profession. It teaches people to speak the language of belief without ever experiencing the transformation. And Jesus takes the argument one level deeper. James diagnoses the problem, and Jesus exposes the source. He explains why these professions cannot last. He says, fruit is not something we manufacture. It reveals what kind of tree we are. Legalism focuses on, I came across this term this last week. Legalism focuses on what they call external fruit stapling. Have you ever heard of that, fruit stapling? Where you take the good fruit and you staple it to them dead branches. How's that going to work out? But how many people do we know that do that? They take the fruit that they see around them. They take the fruit that they may have a little piece, and they're like, I'm going to put that on my branch. I don't know a lot about growing crops or apples or anything at all. We don't do that at our house. But I do know I can't take an apple from Walmart and put it on a tree outside and go, look, I grew a tree. I grew an apple. Not going to work. And if I leave it there very long, it's dead. Jesus insists that fruit grows from nature, not effort. Listen to his words in Matthew. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. These verses clarify exactly what Paul is saying. The false teachers claim to know God, but their lives, when you look at them, they deny God. This external rule-keeping, it can't hide a corrupt heart. Eventually, what we truly are is revealed by what we do. Legalism produces a profession without transformation. It produces words without deeds. It produces rules without life, religion without godliness. Paul's drawing this sharp contrast between true gospel ministry and legalistic teaching. The goal of Paul's ministry is to produce godly people who do good works. And legalism, by contrast, produces people who deny God and are left, or they're unfit for those good works. Legalism turns obedience into performance. It turns transformation into appearance and faith into self-righteousness. People may feel morally superior, but their hearts are enslaved to sin. Their minds are hardened and their conscience are corrupt. In other words, legalism, it doesn't produce life. It produces death in terms of godliness and purpose. Legalism originates in human invention, focuses on outward ritual, and produces a life that is detached from God's purposes. So how do we know? How do we identify when this is happening in ourselves and even within our communities? We've got to do a few things. We've got to examine our hearts. We've got to look at the way we live and ask, what's it doing? What are the actions we're taking doing? Is it driving us closer to God, or is it masking corruption? We've got to examine our habits. Do they produce genuine love and joy and service, or just disciplined performance? We've got to look around at our community. Are we encouraging growth in godliness through grace, or are we measuring faith by visible conformity? Here, these false teachers claimed to be building godliness, but their product was God-denying lives. True transformation, it doesn't come from rules. It doesn't come from what we do. It comes from the truth of the gospel, the grace of God, the hearts that are renewed from within because of Him. See, legalism is not harmless. Paul warns us clearly. It shrinks obedience to rules and appearances, leaving hearts distant from God. It's rules that manage behavior, but they can't transform the hearts. And without heart transformation, religion becomes empty professions. People become unfit for doing good. And Paul's warning is sharp because legalism is deceptive. It may look serious, it may look disciplined, it may look holy, but underneath it leaves hearts unrenewed. It leaves our lives unfruitful and God's glory unreflected. And so the solution Paul points us to is not more rules, it's the truth of the gospel. And that is what reshapes hearts from the inside out. If God's grace that frees us from the tyranny of sin fills us with a desire for righteousness, it equips us to do good. Legalism says you shouldn't do that. It burdens us with guilt. The gospel says you don't need to do that. Jesus offers something that's so much better, so much greater. So are you relying on rules? Are you relying on rituals and routines and outward appearances rather than God's grace to shape your heart? This is the time. Examine your heart. What does life look like? Is it disciplined, but inwardly it feels dry and joyless and burdensome? Is the gospel inviting you to let go of legalism, to trust God to transform your heart and your desires and your actions? That's what I want you to focus on as we take a few moments to bring these questions before God. Ask Him, seek Him to expose these areas where there may be some of this in your life. I'm not saying we're legalistic here. Maybe some of us have some of these tendencies, though. Maybe this is how we've lived for a long time, relying on self to do this. We need to ask God to renew our hearts through His truth, to fill our life with joy in the power of His grace. So let me pray for you before we come into this time of reflection and response. I'm going to invite the team to come on forward as they prepare. They're going to lead us through another part of our response, but for these next few moments, we're just going to quiet our hearts and do some business with God. Father, forgive us for the times where we've relied on the rules and the appearances of our own efforts instead of your grace to shape our hearts. Father, we ask that you renew us from the inside out by your Spirit. Help us to trust your truth, to delight in your gifts, and live lives that honor you in every thought, word, and deed. God, we ask that you teach us to bear fruit that reflects your love and your goodness. Amen. So take these next few minutes and reflect on these things. I would encourage you, so you can help us know how to pray for you in these things. Take one of those cards out and write down one area in your life where you need God's grace to transform you. Write that down. Share it with us so that we can be praying for you. And I ask you to pray silently about that with Him now. Say, God, guide me in this. Examine my heart with me. Examine my habits. Examine who I am and the motives. And take this seriously today.